Did you understand my notes? I wrote it to you at 6:30 in the morning. Not really. 57. Howdy. Hello, everybody. All the names that I ain't even taking today. Okay, who's got questions for me today? Yes, ma'am.
The description that we do for the project,
Yes.
is that only based on the 1 minute of the Colorado, or are we doing it based on?
Boy, I would love to tell you to do it on the whole thing, but you hate me forever, and so it's only a minute of his speech.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but you will probably need to use the whole recording or when you're out there looking for errors, you're trying to figure out the errors. But yes, transcription of 1 minute of his speech, okay?
And then the description at the beginning, just like.
Yeah, you're faking that one, but you're gonna tell me he's from the Dominican Republic. You're gonna fake out a name. You're gonna tell me whatever else you know about him, which probably is all.
But you would normally do that if I were to do the assignment the way I used to. I always made you go out and find an English language learner and do your own recording and everything else, but COVID came along and plus everybody, I would get people who would go out and find somebody who spoke English better than they did. When they were told, make sure that it is a person who makes lots of errors. And they would go out and suddenly they think, oh, an accent is an error. And in fact, it wasn't. So anyway, yes, 1 minute. And don't forget to put slashes around it. And please remember to put it interlinearly, right? You have, give me a line of orthographic or spelling, and then a line right underneath it of IPA. And that helps me, but it also helps you, and it'll make it easier for you to do that transcription. And then finally, where you're supposed to give me 5 errors, I think it's 5.
Yeah,
5 is the minimum. I want you to give me 7. Give me a few extras. The reason is I'm only going to look for the first 5 good ones. You give me 7 and 2 of them are bad, you're still at full credit. You give me 5 and 2 of them are bad, you're at 60%. So yes.
Can you say something like they use pronouns, or can we just say like you're just looking for pronunciation?
This one is pronunciation. Later, we're going to talk about how they may form words incorrectly. And the third one is going to be how they put sentences together potentially incorrectly. But on this one, it's pretty much pronunciation only. Next question. I'm all excited for the questions that are coming in. Lorraine, help me out. Okay. So we just kicked off morphology on Thursday. It's going to have like 4 parts. So today we're going to cover part 2. We're going to expand our ideas of what kind of morphemes are there. Then we're going to get into a way that you can go in there and start to break them out into different forms or into different pieces and see how words are constructed one affix at a time. And then the last one, which will probably be next Tuesday, is we're going to be talking about word formation processes. Things like how do we go about making compound sentences or compound words? Or how do we go about making acronyms and abbreviations? Personally, I think the morphology stuff is a lot easier than phonology. I hope you will find that to be true. Largely because I imagine most of us have spent a lot of time putting prefixes and suffixes on words to change their meaning. And with the exception of that 4th lecture, that's basically what we're talking about. What we're going to be talking about this time, as we do it though, a little more deeply, not only how does it change the word if I put on the front, but we're also going to be looking at things like basically 4 different categories of morphemes, 4 different ways to break it up, 2 of which are going to be real important. Okay, so we'll get to that. Any questions before I start? Okay, here's the homework for Thursday. Got 3 exercises in the book. They're all very short, so they won't take you very much. D, E, and F. I would like that you would have gone through the phonology study guide by Thursday, because we will spend part of that day talking about your questions. You will have the key about sometime in the morning on 3/3, probably right after midnight. It would be good for you to pull off the key and go through your answers so that if there are places you don't understand where you got something wrong, you'll know to ask questions about it, okay? So I'd like you to have that done. On D2L, there's about 10 minutes worth of videos. One's 8.5 and one's 1.5 minutes. But it's going to be talking about what we're going to look at next time on Thursday, about how can we take a word and start breaking it out into the different pieces. This will be good for you because part of your problem is trying to figure out what the pieces are. But it's much more important for your students to be able to do that, particularly your English language learning students, because as I said last time, as they begin to figure out root words and they start to figure out how to use prefixes and affixes, they can really explode in how fast they start building their vocabularies. So that's what we're going to be doing there. Watch those two. That'll give you a place to make some mental hooks when we actually go through a few extra ones in class. Remember, let's see. Oh, I forgot to put down the part that the project is due on Thursday, beginning of class, 3/3. Surprised that I left that up. Anyway, I did. But remember, next Tuesday, a week from today, we will take the last few minutes of the class and do part 1 of the midterm, which is filling out the vowel and consonant matrices or tables. And then we will take the whole class on Thursday to do the rest of the exam. Okay? And then you're going to walk out of here and have to go to spring break, which will probably be a hard break for everybody, but that's the way life is. It's full of hard breaks. Okay? It's really a hard break for me because when everybody comes back from spring break, nobody wants to work. Okay, you good? All right. One review statement first for general ideas about morphemes. First, morphemes are not the same as syllables. I put in a couple of new ones today. If I look at paper, I've got 2 syllables, right? Paper, but there's only one morpheme. The PA by itself isn't anything, and the PER at the end is really nothing by itself either. 2 syllables, 1 morpheme. Elephant, 3 syllables, 1 morpheme. There's no real way to break out elephant into different morphemes. So it's got 3 syllables and 1 morpheme. And then finally, cows, which is the one I had before, has 1 syllable, but it's got 2 morphemes. The noun cow and the marker S to make it plural. Okay? So morphemes are not the same as syllables. I talk to lots of people and they want to get tied up in syllables, but that's not it. Okay? Got to look for word parts. Next. Identical spellings don't mean identical things. I know that sounds really weird. You'll see how S plays into this in a few minutes. I can put an S on the end of a word that is a noun, and I make it plural, right? Hunters, it's an S. I can take that same S and put it on the end of a verb, and I don't get plural verb. In fact, this is for the present tense, the 3rd person singular. He, she, and it. All right. And I could make S over here, even though I've got this little extra apostrophe in there. When somebody says hunters, you didn't hear the apostrophe. So as far as I'm concerned, we spell it with an S. And the idea here is one case it's plural, one case it's something we do to verbs to mark it as but he, she, or it did it. And we can also take an S and put it on the end of nouns and make them possessive. 3 S's, 1 S, 3 meanings. Okay.
So it's important to watch for this. We'll see it happen in just a few minutes. Next, we have irregular and regular morphemes. Normally, we take ed and we put it on the end of a verb. Most of the time, that makes it a past tense verb. But we also have a lot of irregular verbs in the past tense, where we take something like buy. If we want to talk about buy yesterday, it's bought. We can't say I buyed it. Little kids will say I buyed it, or I goed for a little while until they self-correct. But ate is the same thing as the verb eat plus ed, or the past tense marker. So we do have these irregulars. We have the same thing going on with nouns and pluralization. We've got 3 deer. Whoa, wait a minute. I said 3, that's plural, but we didn't put an S. I could take oxen and say we have 2 oxes, but we wouldn't say I have 2 oxes, we've got 2 oxen. But if we took the word axe instead of ox, we're back to the regular one, right? So watch out for the fact that we've got regular and irregular morphemes. Things like men, women, and children is another great example of pluralization that's irregular. It's using the old German way of making plurals. And then finally, morphemes are not necessarily the same as the history or origin of the word. We've already talked about nobody eats a hamburger, but we eat hamburgers all the time. Same goes for frankfurters. If you prefer hot dogs to hamburgers, we have the same issue. Why would we have 2 German cities calling out hamburgers and frankfurters? That's all we said. The guy who invented English was drinking. Okay, now let's go over A, B, and C. Hopefully, you didn't find these too difficult. My first one, I always love this first one. What is the meaning of the morpheme mc in front of McMuffin, McNuggets, and McDLT? Sebastian, what does mc mean? Did you look that up in the dictionary? Oh, it might actually mean that sometimes, but in this case, is it a son of a nugget? McDonald's nugget, McNugget. You can't get McNuggets at Burger King. You can't get a McDLT at Wendy. So what does the Mc mean? Lorraine, I'm over here to you. What does that Mc and McDLT mean? McRibs, McNuggets, ownership. Oh. God, you guys are deep thinkers. You're thinking too deeply. Jen, what does Mc mean? McDonald's. It means it was made at McDonald's. Anybody can have nuggets, but only McDonald's has McNuggets. And anybody can have a DLT, but only McDLT from McDonald's. Okay, so don't think too deeply. Don't get too lost here. What is the meaning of the morpheme aholic in workaholic, chocoholic, and foodaholic? What does aholic mean? Yes, it means exactly addicted to, because we got alcoholic where we probably started, and then we generated all these new funny words like chocoholic, addicted to chocolate, or shopaholic. My wife watches QVC. It's evil. There's nothing more evil than QVC. First, it bores me to death, and second, it sells her stuff. Terrible. All right, so we got addicted to, that's what aholic means, right? We could put it on the end of lots of different words. And then, Jen, you already did one, so let's make Kendra have a difficult one. Are you ready? What kind of evidence could be used to argue that action and package each contain 2 morphemes? Before you go there, for everybody,
when I ask for pieces of evidence like this, and you'll see it on the test, there's a couple questions like this. When I say, give me evidence of something, you would give me examples that show that particular fact, okay? So in this case, action and package are both two morpheme words, right? Right. How do you know? Exactly. So one of them is the ION, which shows up in three different ways, by the way. It shows up sometimes as ION, like in action, shows up as TION in things like traction, and it shows up in another one, Asian, in things like information, but it's all basically the same thing, right? Three different forms of it. So you gave me that one. Should we pass it over to her and make her do package? Or did you figure it out? You want to be a hero? We need a hero. You've heard that song. Okay. Yes. And so a piece of evidence to show that that's two. Uh-huh. Yeah, but does that have anything to do with package? Are we talking about the age of a pack? No. This one was hard, actually.
I mean, I just started making words like you did.
Yes. What did you come up with for package?
Stories.
Ooh, that was a good one. I never even thought of that. Store and edge, pack and edge, bag and edge. That's the only one I came up with because package and baggage are kind of the same thing. Very good. That's the way to do it. You kind of got to go in there and figure out some words that use this part in multiple places. Very good. All right. Mandy. True or false? Every English word ending in ly is an adverb.
False.
False. Can you think of one that it doesn't, isn't? Quickly, no, that'd be an adverb. Typically what happens is if you put ly on the end of an adjective, it becomes an adverb. Quickly, slowly, beautifully, etc. But we also could put ly on the end of a noun, and when we do that, it makes it an adjective. Friendly, something like that. Okay, so good, false. All right, next, number two, if you don't get this one, I'm gonna shoot, no, I won't shoot myself. That would be gross. I'm gonna be super disappointed. Any one English syllable word will also be a one morpheme word. Like you mean it? False. Yes, that's false. We know, right? We saw cows. Finally, Selma, we're at number 3. Any English word with more than one syllable will contain more than one morpheme. Excellent. 3 falses in a row. Give me an example. You're right. Yes. Exactly. Perfect example. Elephant, rhinoceros is another one. So they're long words and they're very short words. And so we can't always use that to determine whether or not we've got more than one morpheme or not. All right. Ariana. Damn, it's Esther then. Either one. Hi. Who?
Isabel.
Oh, Isabel was what I meant to say. Why did I say Esther? I shouldn't have, but Isabel is what I meant. Actually, but you won't believe that ever. So that's okay. How many morphemes are there in the word actor? This is over on C. 2, act and or. Notice another one of those irregulars. We're going to see that we put ER on the end of verbs and it makes it the person who does the action. Occasionally we use a different spelling like OR.
but got it exactly right. Lonnie, winter. Rethink that. Huh? One. Actually, even though it's got two syllables, there's really not two parts there. We do have the word win, but it has nothing to do with seasons, right? And we really don't have a word ter, and therefore that's not going to be a morpheme. So one, right? So don't let the syllables versus the morphemes confuse you. Forthrightness, Christina. Three, what are they? Great. Forthrightness, mother-in-law. Okay. Me too. Must be right. Undo. Arpod. Dude, what are they? What does undo? What does what does the morpheme un make happen? It's the opposite. Very good. Okay. Oh, yeah. You got the hard one here. Aspirin. Well, it can't be zero because it's a thing, right? So it's really a word. So give me another guess. Aspirin. Can you see any S? Can you see any words in there that would be different, meaningful word parts? Okay, good answer. Aspirin. There really aren't any parts in there that we can break out. It isn't one. S would be one, but that's not what we're talking about, right? So it has nothing to do with that. In, yeah, that's a preposition, but it has nothing to do with aspirin, right? You got to watch out for those. And in this case, I can't see anything other than just the one. Best. How many? How many? How many? What are they? That's a tough one, is it not? We saved it for you. Last person in the class, last hardest one. What does best mean? If you were going to put best and tell me what best means, what would you say it means? The most what? The most good, right? Okay, so we've got the most good. Evidently, we've got good and most, or good and the superlative. So much like this works the same way with better. How many in better? Well, there's also two there. It's good and more, or the comparative. Even though it's only one syllable, this one's got two. Remember, men, women, children, those all had two in them also because we had that irregular form. Okay, not enough of that easy stuff. Now let's get into some challenge. Okay, so let's talk about the types of morphemes. Morpheme number one, the type that we're going to talk about is lexical morphemes. And those are things that have meaning in and of themselves. They're very much like the content words that we talked about last time, where most of the meaning in a sentence or in an utterance comes from these content words, or what we might call lexical morphemes. They are nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, perhaps. Some are recognizable as words, like dog running blue. There's some few others that aren't quite that easy. Things like clude, that we can put include, exclude, preclude, subclude, conclude. Basically, this is the morpheme, but it can't be by itself. And eme. Oh, that's even a better one, because we've talked about phonemes, morphemes, graphemes, and lexemes. So eme is actually the meaningful part of that, but they don't all stand alone, but most of them would stand alone as a word. The other side of this is grammatical morphemes. Grammatical morphemes are a little different. They show relationship between lexical morphemes. These are oftentimes the same thing as what we talked about last week as function words. They have a grammatical function, but they don't tend to carry most of the meaning in the store, in a sentence. John went to the store. Well, I would say that the grammatical morphemes is the word to. If I said John went store, you'd probably know exactly what I meant, even if I leave it out. The lexical morphemes or the content words would be John, went, and store. So, showing relationships between lexical morphemes, prepositions are a good example, articles and conjunctions as well. And some grammatical morphemes modify lexical words or lexical morphemes, and they change their function. So I could put an S on the end of a noun and get a plural. That would mean that S is a grammatical morpheme. ED gets tagged on most verbs and it makes it go to the past tense. LY can become an adverb creator or an adjective creator. And ER can be a couple of things, but one of those is an agent or the person who does the action, like drive and driver, farm and farmer, plant and planter, compute and computer, okay? So that would be what we mean here by agent, or you could even think about it as the doer. And then they show grammatical relationships between the words and morphemes, some of the stuff that we talked about up here. So examples of some grammatical morphemes impacting lexical morphemes. Quick, we already used this one. Quick is an adjective, but if I put ly on it, it becomes quickly, and that's an adverb. It's used differently in the sentence. Remote is an adjective, and remotely would be an adverb used differently in a sentence, right? So we might say, oh, we worked remote. Actually, that's grammatically incorrect. It should be we worked remotely. So that's kind of the difference that's in there. So ly is one. We've already mentioned this a couple times. We could put s on the noun and make it plural or possessive. We could put verb on the end of s on the end of a verb, and it marks it as being done by he, she, or it, a third person singular. I eat, you eat, she eats. You sleep, he sleeps. The difference being this s on the end when we are using third person singular. And then ish. Well, we could take ish. When would you ever use ish? Give me a good example of ish. Yes. Oh, very good. Exactly. It's kind of like in between. So when do you want me to come over? 9 or 9-ish, right? Not exactly 9. I'm not worried about exactly 9. Greenish. Well, greenish sounds like, yeah, it's green, but not dark green. And so we take something like ish and we can stick it on the end of an adjective, and we still have an adjective, but it now means something a little different. It's a little less intense than it would have been if we left it all, right? Or in between a couple of things. So that's another example. And ness. Well, we take ness a lot. We stick it on the end of an adjective and we end up with a noun. I am so happy. I have a lot of happiness. Okay, happiness would be a noun, whereas happy was an adjective. Busy comes up with busyness, or maybe even when you want to think about it as business. The idea here is these are grammatical morphemes. They impact lexical morphemes in various ways. But the lexical morphemes have most of the meaning. So I want you to be able to remember this long enough to do exercises D and E. Okay? After D and E, I'm not going to deal with it anymore. The reason is we could argue about some of them. Okay? And it's not necessarily super clear. So you will have D and E will have you checking out lexical versus grammatical morphemes. After that, it's not going to be particularly important.
But the next group, morpheme 2, type 2, is going to be one of the categories. We have free and we have bound. So free morphemes are morphemes that can stand alone, right? Most lexical morphemes are also free morphemes. They can stand there alone. The, blue, dog, you, establish if we want to. All kinds of different words that can stand alone as regular words. These are free morphemes. We contrast that with bound morphemes. If I tell you free morphemes can stand alone, what do you think bound morphemes are? Isabel, just so I could show you that I could remember your name 5 minutes later. Isabel, what do you think a bound morpheme is? Yeah. Well, not exactly, but very close. It is when you put an S on the end to make something plural, that's a bound morpheme. Why? Because S can't stand by itself. So we talk about free morphemes as, hey, these are words that are, these are things that can stand there by themselves. They don't need anything else. And bound morphemes have to be attached to a base of some sort. Okay? Remember the idea of a base. We attach affixes, prefixes and suffixes to a base. So all the affixes that we know of are going to be bound morphemes. Yes? Were you going to say something? Just scratching? You know, if we did that in an auction, you could just bought it. Okay. All right. So morphemes that must be attached to something else. Have to. They just don't stand there by themselves. Uni. Uni what? Unilateral. Unibody. Anti-war. War. How about ward? They ward. That, as in the verb war and in the past. Re as in reinitiate, etc. Re doesn't stand by itself in this particular form. Uni doesn't normally stand, well, uni doesn't, but for the most part, these are things we have to attach to a different word. Okay? We have to attach it. Now, here's a question for you. Thinking back 2 slides. Are all lexical morphemes free morphemes? Arpod? No, exactly. Remember, I showed you a couple already that are essentially the lexeme word, or the lexeme would be things like clue. Clue doesn't stand there by itself. You need to put something on it. So clue, even though it's a lexical morpheme, can't stand by itself. It needs something attached to it. So there are some goofy situations where we've got words like exclude, sept. What has to go on sept? Accept or accept. Those would be 2 good ones, right? Clude, we talked about exclude, include, preclude, conclude, seclude. That's as far as I can go. And eft. Where does eft come in? It's not an early pregnancy test. Eft. Inept. Have you ever heard of anybody who was eft? But I bet you've heard of inept, because you already knew that one. There's another example. The eft part is really the lexical part. It's the part that has the meaning, but it has to be attached to something else. And inept is kind of an interesting thing. Okay? So when I say that there are really important classifications that I want you to remember, free and bound is one classification I want you to remember. Think of it as free versus bound. I want you to remember these, okay? Quite important. The lexical grammatical, like I said, you're going to see it in exercises B and E, probably aren't going to ever see it again. I'm not going to worry about it. So we talked last week about content and function words. Today we said that's a lot like
lexical versus grammatical morphemes, right? Now we've talked about free and bound morphemes. Pretty easy stuff so far, right? Especially if I'm not going to hold you accountable to lexical and grammatical. Pretty easy, right? Anybody awake? Right. Okay. The last one that I really want you to, and these, so the free versus bound, and down here, inflectional versus derivational. Make sure you have those written down, that you're going to recognize what those are when we discuss them. We've talked about free and bound. It's really easy. If it can't stand alone, it must be a bound morpheme. If it can stand alone, there's at least one free morpheme in there at the root, okay? But inflectional and derivational is where we're going to start. I don't know why, but we're going to start having some problems. And we shouldn't, because it's really pretty easy. But we're going to talk about those two. If I were to tell you the most important ones, or the most important split that's important that we need, it's going to be inflectional versus derivation. We've used them, you've used them over and over again, just never had a name for them. Probably never cared about it. But we do need to talk about these two and how they are different. So let us do that. First, let's talk about inflectional morpheme. You know, when we talk about inflection, usually if we're outside of a linguistics class and somebody, I didn't like the inflection of the statement, it's kind of like where they stressed it, right? You can inflect the sentence by raising your accent at the end, and you're asking a question many times. You leave that off, and you can inflect it by being very strong, right? We're not talking about that kind of an inflection here. What we're talking about is the type of morpheme that is first, it's bound, okay? It's bound morpheme. It's grammatical because it's not going to carry a whole lot of meaning until it's attached to something else. So it's going to be an affix. Remember, affix could be either suffixes or prefixes, but we're talking about affixes, so they're not standalone things. And the easiest part about this is there are 8. There are exactly 8. There are not 9 or 7. There are 8. So let's start taking a look. You've seen many of these in our examples already. Let's try that one. I can attach the S on the end of a word. That hyphen being in front of that indicates that it's happening after the base, okay? So I can put S on the end of a noun base or root, and it's basically the idea of plural. An S for plural. We can also put in an S. In fact, from a spelling perspective, it's apostrophe S, but it doesn't sound or is not spoken any differently than the other S. So we've got an S that we can use to mark nouns as plural, right? So we put an S on the end of a noun, it tends to make it plural, or it tends to make it possessive. And the fact that we've got an apostrophe here is just a spelling thing. It has nothing to really do with the spoken and the heard language. And then we've got another S. Look at this. We've now got 3 out of 8 that are S. Man, it's going to be easy to remember these. We have S that we put on the end of a verb to mark it as third person singular. Everybody know what I mean by third person singular? Anybody want to be brave and say, I have no clue what you mean by third person singular? Anybody? Huh? Thank you for the bravery. This is really quite important, so we need to make sure. So, and well, I've got singular person and I've got plural. Singular, first person. Who is the first person singular? I. Very good. Who is the second person singular? Is it? You're absolutely correct. You. And the third person singular is? Huh? She or he? How about it? Would it work? Not very convinced, but yes, you are. It is he, she, it. It's basically, if we're talking about one thing, it's everything that is an I or you. So John is, if we use it as John does that, that's first, third person singular. He does it. The building fell. That's the building would be it. So it's an it. So in any case, we've got that. Then we come over to the plural. We've got we. We've got this terrible aberration in English that is you. Because so how do you know whether you're talking to you or to you? You don't really. And then what's this one going to be? They. So when we're talking about he, she, or it, we need to add the verb. If we're talking about the present tense, it's going to end in an S. This is the place where everybody gets in big trouble when their teacher writes SVA on all of your essays because you didn't match the subject and the verb. So that's what I mean by third person singular. Next, ER. Now this is the kind of ER that I put on the end of an adjective. Clear, clearer, big, bigger, blue, bluer, heavy, heavier, etc. It's the ER that makes it more something. So before we talked about best was most good. Well, we could say better is more good. And then there's the weird people like me who still say more better, but shouldn't. So ER, then the EST for the most of something, right? So between my sister and I am the elder sibling. That means I'm the one that's older. If I had a bunch of brothers and sisters and I would still be the eldest, that would be the most old. Okay, so that's the EST. This stands for the word superlative. Comparative, superlative. We then have ED, which is the past marker for most regular things. That gets attached to a verb. And I've got EN, which is a little weird. We only have a few EN words, but this is how we would mark something as a past participle. We have steal in the present tense, stole in the past tense, and stolen as the past participle. I got eat in the present tense, ate as the past tense, and eaten as the past participle. So we kind of mark that with an EN. Sometimes it's got an EN, other times it looks exactly like the past tense. Finally, we've got ING, the present participle. I am going to the store. I am buying some eggs. I will be eating those eggs. All of those are present participles. It's the verb with ing attached at the end. Now you're going to see these more in 310 than you're going to see them in here, but you should recognize that these are the 8 that are inflectional morphemes. They are different from the others because they are very regular. They happen in almost all words if we want to do certain things to them. And so, as we call them inflections, it is changing the word meaning in a very standard way. Something else, what do you notice? Well, if I add one of these inflectional morphemes to some part of speech, the resulting part of speech is not going to change. If I put ing on the end of go, so I am going, that's a present participle. It's still a verb. I have not seen him. Well, there's a past participle in the word seen. It was a verb. We add that on. It's now still a verb. Okay. So here's a couple things to notice. What do you notice about inflectional morphemes? A couple of things. One, very productive. It means we use them over and over in exactly the same way. They're very regular. So even though there are some irregularities, they are very regular. Typically, they don't change the word class. I start with a noun or I start with an adjective. I start with a verb. I end with the same part of speech. And notice, what did I say about this little hyphen in front of it? I said that means it goes at the end of the base, right? So in this case, every inflectional morpheme in English is a suffix. Okay? It's a suffix. The two important things to remember really is they don't change the word class or the part of speech. They don't change it, and they are all suffixes. This is the idea of inflectional morphemes. There are only 8. Notice that these 3, while they look the same, have different meanings, so they're counted as 3 different ones. Okay? Question? Yes.
They only turn one, but what if it's plural?
What if, I'm sorry?
Like it's the root. Like,
Oh, you're really getting us to the tough part now. We will talk about that. Save that question for a little bit because it's, I have another question where I show that same thing, but the difference is you're gonna hate, are you taking 310? When you take 310, you're gonna find that the plural S is added to a noun, but the possessive S is added to a noun phrase. My example for you, and you'll see this again later, but decline that. Sorry about that. That's my phone system hooked to my computer. If you take the queens, right, I could say the 2 queens of the 2 queens were coronated. Okay, the 2 queens. S is the plural and it's marked onto the noun. But if I said that the 2 queens of England's, the S got still on the plural S still went with queens, but the Queen of England's crown, that apostrophe S is going at the end of Queen of England. Really kind of a weird thing. So you won't have to mess with that in this class, but you may see it again in 310. But you will find that inflections only occur once. So when we did that S, the plural S worked with the noun. The possessive S worked with the noun phrase. And I'm sure it's not very clear to you yet what I mean, but that's the difference. I bet you go home with a headache. Okay. Anyway, there's only one in a word. Okay. That's very important. As we mentioned, there's still going to be some irregulars. So we notice those man and men, child and children, oxen, oxen. What is it? Wait, I think it's like, oh, we're getting there. Get ready. Hold your I don't think anybody watches Fox News. Sean Hannity always used to say, hold on to your seat. Hold on to your seat, we'll be in. Okay, but so we do have a few of these that are irregular. By and bought, we can take a lot of irregular verbs and we put them into the past tense and they become irregular. So we have something like this. It says no NDEE on the end of bought and no EN on the end of on by for either of those. And then beautiful. Sometimes we have too many syllables. We can't just add an EST, so we have to kind of use an irregular form, which would be the most. Beautiful. Okay. Now, these are the derivational ones. Okay, they're really quite important to know. We have the 8. There they are, right? And there's only going to be one in a word. Now, the other side of this is a little more complicated. And these are where we have derivational morphemes. Okay, so we've got inflectional morphemes is one group, that was the 8, and we have derivational morphemes, and there are hundreds of them. If you don't have to memorize them, but you're going to recognize a whole bunch of them. You called out ick, that's going to be one. You used undo when we were talking through the exercises. Un is another one. So there are lots and lots of derivational morphemes, and they act a little bit differently. So let's take a look with a few examples. Look at that, eyes. Well, I can take eyes and put it on the end of a noun. I had a hard time coming up with one, but cannibal and eye. So I can cannibal, that's a thing, that's a noun, and cannibalize is going to be a okay. What did one cannibal say to the other cannibal when they were eating a clown? Huh? Yeah. Does anything taste funny? Exactly. That's a cooler joke than you gave me credit for. Okay. Does anything taste funny to you? Oh, okay. Eyes. We could take cannibal, put it on put eyes on the end of cannibal and get cannibalized, right? That would be a verb. It's an action. Eyes. We can put eyes on the end of an adjective, and we're going to get a verb. Modern, modernize. Okay, so that would be an example. Un. Well, we could take un and put it on a verb, undo. We could take un and put it on an adjective, and it would be unreal, for instance. Or unhealthy would be 2 examples. Interestingly, they both are going to mean the opposite or not the word that follows. Oh, first thing I want you to notice, where's the hyphen on these? This means these go at the end of the word. When I put the hyphen up here, where is it going to go? At the beginning of the base or the beginning of the word. That's going to be a cool differentiator here shortly. ER. I could take ER and put it on the end of a verb. Does it mean more of that verb? No, it means the agent, right? We talked about the do and the doer. Take it and put it on the end of a verb. We're going to end up with the person who does that verb. Next, we want to go in here and say, oh, we got ing. I can stick ing on the end of a verb. And when I do that, I'm going to end up with a different word, either an adjective or a noun. For instance, I enjoy, and usually when you enjoy something, it is a something, right? I enjoy fish and I enjoy vegetables, but I could also say I enjoy eating, and eat is a verb with ing on it has now become a noun. So we're going to see that again in a minute. Ness, we talked about, did we talk about ness? I think we did early on. NES can get added on to the end of an adjective, happy, and become happiness becomes a noun. And ick Give me an ick. Where can I add ick? Sebastian, this was your choice. Impressionistic. Impressionistic. Well, that's impressionist. Okay, that'll work. Impressionistic would add it onto a noun. What's it going to become? You think, what kind of a word is going to come out of that? Impressionist. It's a noun. Impressionistic. It's an adjective. So we can deal with that. Oh, we talked about this one already. I think it was you. Kendra said ION, and I said, yep, great, ION. Sometimes it's TION, sometimes it's ATION, but it's essentially three forms of the same thing. We can add it to a verb, and we get a. I remember. We take ation and we put it on the end of inform, and then we get information. It takes it from a verb to a noun. Exactly. And then we can also, oh, here's another one that's a prefix. We could put a in front of aerobic. Oh, that's not a good one. Typical, atypical. It would also mean, much like it would make it a negative word, atypical. Amorphous. Oh, that's a cool one. It's amorphous. I can remember that. Being shapeless, right? Okay, so here's one thing that was interesting about these. Sometimes, many times, it will change the part of speech. We went from a noun to a verb or an adjective to a verb. But it doesn't always. So I got verbs going to verbs and adjectives staying as adjectives. Here I got verbs going to nouns. And I've got adjectives going to nouns, etc. There are hundreds of these morphemes. The differences that you need to notice now, and you should write this down because it will come back and I'll ask this question almost just like this. They are productive, but they're less so than inflections. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. We've already talked about it when we talked about phonology and we talked about IN. But they're kind of productive, but they're not as good. Notice, this is the most important thing. They can be prefixes and suffixes. Some of them go at the beginning, some of them go at the end. They often, but not necessarily, change the part of speech. So remember that they may or they may not. Inflection will not. And then finally, we can have multiples in the same word. So your example was impressionistic. How many morphemes in impressionistic? Actually, there's even more. Impress, impression, impressionist, impressionistic, 4. Now, all of those, impress would be the first, right? So that's going to be the base, and then you got 3 morphemes that are derivational attached to it. How about if I said unimpressionistic? Would you know what unimpressionistic means? Means the opposite of impressionistic, right? So I can have prefixes and suffixes in the same word, right? So derivations are essentially unlimited. If you ever want to go out, you go out on the internet and show me a list of derivational affixes or derivational morphemes in English. You go to the right site, just go on and on and on. But nobody has asked me a really important question. Oh, why did I do that? Oh, just to show that there were 2, they could attach to 2 different places. Some things only attach to one other thing. But in this case, I just had 1 and 2. There's something else here that should be bothering somebody who's really been paying attention. Right, Diana? Yeah. Diana knows what it is.
She's gonna make you guys suffer the learning. Right? Secret. It's a 310. Oh, 310, having completed 310. What do you notice that's weird? Something is really strange. I told you in the inflectional morphemes one thing, and now I seem to be telling you something different. What is it? Sebastian's tired of me calling him. Diana too. So that leaves you the only person. No, not so much that. But that's a true statement. They are pretty, essentially they're unlimited. What about this? I told you ER was an inflectional morpheme. Didn't I? Right? Look back at your list of 8. Is ER in there? It's right there. And then I said ING is an inflectional morpheme, but now I got it up here. Now what are you going to do? This is something you got to pay attention to. The reason that I'm calling it out to you is, like most things in linguistics, you got to look at the context or the word to know what's going on. When I put ER as an inflectional morpheme, what did I attach it to? Anybody remember? I attached it to an adjective, right? So clear and clearer. And I ended up with a inflectional morpheme, right? This should have ended up with an adjective because I'm going to chase you guys out of the front row. I know it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. You'd be sitting in the back row. Very good. You would end up with an adjective. ER, clear and clearer. Both of those are adjectives. We didn't change it. But if I take the verb, see over there, I added it to an adjective. Here I'm adding it to a verb. And when I do that, I get a noun. When I add ing to a verb over on the inflectional side, I still get a verb, a present participle verb. But if I add ing here, I get something that's called a gerund. Anybody remember what a gerund is? No? You never had to do that in high school? Oh, well, okay, good enough. That's great. I'll call that teacher up and say she didn't have much of an impression, making much of an impression. Not much of an impact. ING would be something like I am going, but a gerund is a verb that ends in ING that is a noun, that is acting like a noun. Okay? So I could say I love something. That something is swimming. Swim, which is starting out as a verb, is now being used as a noun. It's something that I love to do, right? The same thing could happen with eating. I used that example earlier. There are cases where the ing will add on to a verb and it will look exactly the same, but it's still being used as a verb. That would be the inflectional ing. On the other hand, if I'm adding it onto a verb and it ends up being used like a noun, it is derivational. Those are the only two that are really tricky, and you kind of got to look and you kind of got to think. I probably won't do this one, but I wouldn't be surprised to do this one, right? That you would go out there and you'd see something with an ER there and you have to tell me that it was derivational. Probably won't do it either one, but I could. All right, but the idea is we've got hundreds of these. Some of them can be added at the front, some of them can be added at the back. We can have multiple in the front, multiples in the back. We can actually, at the end of all of that, we can put on a whole bunch of derivational affixes or morphemes and then pluralize it by putting an S at the end. But that S is still an inflection because it's just making a plural.
So you'll get a chance to see a little bit more of this. It's really not as difficult maybe if I make it, but kind of important to understand the difference. When I said that derivational morphemes are a little less productive than inflections, they're not as movable. So I could have unhappy, ungrateful, and unmistakable, but I don't have incapable, incomplete, or unregular. The form changes for some reason to incapable, incomplete, and irregular, right? That's how I would negate these words. So I can't negate every single adjective or every single verb with un. Sometimes there's going to be a different one that we have to use. And maybe one that's a little more familiar would be claimant. If you have insurance and you write a claim, you're the claimant. You can almost think about it as being the claimer. They never would say the claimer. But while they would say claimant, we would never say teaching instead of teacher, or working or writing in case of worker or replacement of worker and writing. So they're not exactly the same. Okay? The inflections were much more regular. So some key morphological rules. This is another place to note the differences here. All inflectional morphemes in English are suffixes. Okay? They're all suffixes when they're inflectional, but it's derivational. It could be either prefixes or suffixes. So if you look at a word and I say to them, I say, is this anti in anti-war, is that inflectional or is it derivational? You would, and why? You would say it's derivational. And why? Why would anti and anti-war be a derivational? How do you know that it's a derivational? Kendra, do you know? Look at the slide. Look at the slide carefully. Was it something I said? I knew it was. What does it say up there? Yes, it could be. And so if it's anti in front of anti-war, that makes it the suffix or prefix. Therefore, it cannot be inflectional, right? Why? Okay, that's one way of saying it, because anti is a prefix and only derivational affixes can be prefixes. Inflections always are suffixes. You'll see that again. Unusable, reusable. So I've got, here's multiples, use and un and able, and use and re and usable. So I've got those two. So I can have multiples, and they can be prefixes and or suffixes. Inflections won't change the word class, so that's important. They do change the meaning, but they don't change the word class. I start with a noun, I end up with a noun. Inflectional morphemes always come at the very end. If I have just a root and an inflection, it'll be the last thing there. If I have a root and 5 derivational affixes, the final thing, if there is an inflection, it will be the final thing on that word. So I could say anti-disestablishmentarianism. So I've got anti and dis at the beginning, right? And then I've got establish as the root word, meant, established, meant, and then airy, and then ism. And then if I wanted to make it plural, I could put an S on the end and go anti-disestablishmentarianisms, and that S would be inflection because it made it plural, and you know that it's going to be at the very end. Kingdoms. We don't have kingsdom. The derivation, I'm sorry, the inflection will always be at the And let's see, only one inflectional morpheme occurs in a given word. So I can't have mused, mused. I have mused, I could have mused, or I could have muses. And similar here, I can't have prettier-esque. Okay, if there's going to be an inflection, there will only be one. So I could have mused, or I could have muses, or I could have prettier, I could have prettier, prettiest, but I can't have both. And then finally, there's no limit to the derivational morphemes in a word. No law that says I can only have 7, or I can only have 10, or I can only have 1. Particularly get into certain medical words, they get longer and longer and longer. Brain twister, RPOD. This is what I was talking about before. If number 3 is true, where I can only have 1 inflectional morpheme, how can I say that musings is a word? Well, I know that this is an inflectional morpheme, can't be anything else. But this guy is actually attaching to the word muse and turning it into a noun. So it's a derivational ing. Goes from muse to musing, right? Muse a verb to musing a noun, and then I add s onto that noun. Okay? That's kind of goofy, but that's the way it works, right? Doesn't happen very often, but you can run into a few of those cases. And since you've all paid attention to me all day, kind of. It was a struggle. But here's the homework. Okay, you've seen that before. You remember I gave you over 2 minutes 2 times? Guess what? Here's your 4 minutes back. I don't know you anything anymore. Oh, we're done. All right. Don't forget to bring me your third project. Wow, that was broadcast on. Oh man, I hope nobody was watching. I had left it on Zoom for a long ago. Oh, gross. Have a good one. See you later. Okay, bye. Mother in doesn't, but that means you would have to go with mother in. So, and in-law has a meaning. Still a combination of 2 words. That's why I would choose. Single. That's my point. You make that argument. Yeah. With verbs or with yeah.